Hello, everyone, and welcome to Human SOS Show. We're on episode 140. Hope that as you join us, that you will be sure and let us know where you're joining from. And we always love to get your questions, comments, so that we hear your opinions and have more engagement. Because after all, you guys are the key to the show, not Anton and I. So, Anton, you want to open us up for the episode?
Good morning, everybody. Thank you so much for joining. Today, we're going to be talking about emotional intelligence and staying in emotional intelligence while under times of stress. As of always, but really as of lately, ever since pandemic happened and the world's gone crazy, we've been dealing with more and more stress. And I noticed myself, having less emotional intelligence, becoming more reactive, maybe snapping sometimes. And it made me think about it because I snapped at my son the other day. He wasn't listening, and I kind of like raised my voice at him. And I was thinking to myself, he didn't deserve it. It wasn't that big of a deal, whatever he did. And even if it was, like snapping at him doesn't do anything. And then I regretted it. And it made me wonder how many people, in the audience, how many people around me do that kind of thing where we react and then we regret what we said, what we did, how we responded. So today we want to talk about emotional intelligence and how to maintain it while under times of stress, and even what plays a role in our emotional intelligence and why it's hindered under the time of stress. But before we get started, as always, please type in, where you're joining from, perhaps maybe some examples of where you've seen this happen or examples of where you regularly see this happen. One thing we always talk about is driving. I notice myself as well when I'm more stressed out. When I'm driving, I am not an emotional intelligent human because I am very, very angry. I am sometimes have the desire to put a finger up that is not an appropriate finger and
Not
do
a
it that way,
directional finger.
and then regret it later. And my girlfriend always reminds me, she says, well, those people may not even realize you're angry, but you're carrying that anger with you. So, Kev, how's your emotional intelligence lately? You're as good as you've always been, getting better, or have you been impacted by more stress in the last few years?
Generally, I stay pretty level, and but you mentioned driving. That's still a challenge for me because when I am in the vehicle, I am especially sensitive to people's uh, driving habits and mistakes, and it's unfortunate. And depending, obviously, on how I'm doing mentally, emotionally, physically at a given point, when I'm driving, sometimes it's better than others. And but just definitely at moments challenged to maintain a level of emotional intelligence that is appropriate situation. Welcome, Lee. Glad to have you. But maybe we need to talk about. We assume people know what emotional intelligence is. Maybe we need to talk about uh, what it actually means to have emotional intelligence, or as the version is. Your thoughts on that one, Anna?
Absolutely. When I first learned about emotional intelligence, I learned it from a book called EQ 2.0, I believe is what it's called.
Okay.
And it frames emotional intelligence as four components. You have your self-management and you have relational management. And I'm trying to remember what the other two now because I just had them and I just lost them in my head. Oh no, so it starts with self-awareness, relational awareness, self-management, and relational management,
There you
right?
go.
So um, it's being able to understand yourself as who you are and almost looking at it from a third point of view and truly seeing what's coming out into the world. Um, and then seeing how you're interacting with other people as the other component, being aware how what you say, what you do, your mannerisms, how they impact other people around you. And then ultimately from there is being able to manage each one of those components to adjust to the situation, to adjust to the environment, whatever it may be. And oftentimes when I hear people talk about emotional intelligence, they focus more on that awareness piece.
Mm,
they're all about self-awareness, all about how you're impacting other people. In my opinion, I think that's the easier one of the two. Everything has to start with awareness,
of
but the
course. Yeah.
management component is the much harder part, right? Just like I can be aware I'm being being not a great person, but if I'm not changing it, if I'm not able to adjust over time, it doesn't do anybody any
Right.
service. So that's my understanding of emotional intelligence. Kyle. I've always thought about it as those four components. What is it to you?
Well, I think of some different additional aspects of it. One is self control. And that's something that we have less and less of in our current culture. That it is a deciding whether we're going to react or respond. And self control is a responsive approach so that we check what we say to whom about what and consider responding rather than reacting. And it's when we react that we kind of jump back into that survival mindset and say and do things without rational consideration. And of course, another component to me is, and we talk about being empathetic. I think that is a foundational piece of being emotionally intelligent. I don't think you can be emotionally intelligent without having empathy involved. And
Hmm.
so, because if you're not empathetic, you're going to find it difficult to respond more than just out of our survival or lizard brain when things happen. It's that empathy that helps us to move from our survival reactive mode into a, more responsive or self control. One of the exercises I do with myself when I'm driving is that empathy is identifying with the other person. And I have to remind myself, first of all, I'm not perfect in driving. I've done some things accidentally that would look very dumb and almost like I was being a jerk. And then the other is that we don't know what the situation is they're dealing with. They may be have just had some kind of bad situation that they've dealt with, and their mind and emotions are tied up, and that they may not be at their best, and their driving reflects it. And we could say, well, don't drive if you've got a problem going on, but we know that that's kind of unrealistic in today's culture. So the empathy helps me to be able to choose to be emotionally intelligent and rather than reactive. Um, so, and Lee makes a comment kind of interesting. I'll be curious as we talk about he talks about emotional intelligence is very important, but so is social intelligence. Never heard, I don't, well, I have heard of the phrase social intelligence, and I would be curious, what are your thoughts on social intelligence versus emotional intelligence?
Um, to me, they're under the same kind of umbrella, right? And as I mentioned, relational awareness and
Mm.
relational management would be for me social intelligence, right? There's EQ, and I think social intelligence is SQ.
Oh, okay.
Is the thing that people call it these days. I think that we don't need to get caught up in the names, right? I think that it's
Okay.
about what they represent, because in reality, a different book calls something a different name than
Hmm.
another book, and all of a sudden we have two different terms, but they could be talking about similar concepts, similar constructs.
Right.
And that's kind of how I see it. If Lee, you want to clarify that you see it differently, would love to hear your take on it. But thinking about both of those things, whether it be you're managing yourself, aware about yourself or others, is it requires you to use the right part of your brain, the human part of your brain.
Mm.
You Animals don't have social, emotional intelligence. They don't have social intelligence. They don't have any of that stuff, right? They have basic intelligence. uh, and we are designed to have both the animal brain and the human brain. And what often happens, the reason we lose our ability to have emotional intelligence is that our animal brain is just way overactive and our human brain is underactive. It's not performing properly. So, as we've talked about this many times on the show, as our body, as our brain receives signals from, our spine, the first thing to catch that signal is going to be our limbic brain, that lizard brain, as I've heard you call, Kev. And it's the first thing that's going to receive it. If it is overactive, if it is in a very excited state, it is not going to pass that signal on to our prefrontal cortex, which is much further up the stem, and be able to respond. We oftentimes end up subconsciously reacting. So let's play out, some situations where we, reacted. For example, when I lost my temper with my son, right? There's a story that almost subconsciously played out that created either fear or some sort of a strong emotion. That emotion overwhelmed that animal brain, and the first thing I could do was think about, how do I stop this situation from happening? How do I make this go away right now, right this second? So of course I raised my voice, and then we have everything play out, and then I have guilt afterwards that I have to deal with. So really, this is where stress comes in. When we are stressed out, when we're constantly, receiving more stress than we can handle. And remember, this does not mean that a single event occurred. This means that many small events occurred over time without proper recovery, that now we're in this reactive survival mode. So then that emotional intelligence becomes nearly impossible. So that's kind of what I look at as a foundation of why stress is so important. Stress management is so important to managing our emotional intelligence.
Well, as you were talking, it occurred to me that part of our problem, because again, go back to lizard brain versus our frontal cortex, lizard brain is survival mode. In other words, fear, threat, whatever is what triggers that to become more active. And I think that many of us live in a regular state of survival mode. We're always feeling under attack, threatened. Our and I talk about this regularly, but our value, we feel like our value is in question, and all of those things are going to cause us to stay in a survival mode because we're always looking to defend ourselves, a defensive posture. And when I tell you, anybody's in a defensive posture, they're going to do things that are not rational, that are not based on the circumstances as they are. It's based on the circumstances plus a lot of other stuff going on in the background. And so when we can deal with some basic aspects of ourselves, we come to a place where we're not in a constant state of survival or defensiveness, I think we have a better chance of maintaining our emotional intelligence when things do happen around us, because we've already addressed things happening inside of us. And when we have those in proper perspective, we're healthy there, then the outside factors are not as big a deal. But if we're in a constant state of survival and then something goes wrong around us, outside of us, we're already loaded, spring loaded to pounce. And so it's no surprise when that happens. Before we even know it, boom, we've reacted and made poor decision in how to respond, and our emotional intelligence just got kicked out of the picture. And so I think part of what we've got to do is ask ourselves what's going on inside of us on an ongoing basis that we can address, so that when other things happen, it's not a combination of everything. It is just the things happening around us. And I'm trying to remember, because we used the graphic example was in comment about Jekyll and Hyde. Wasn't it some kind of medication or some kind of potion that the Dr. Jekyll drank and it would have caused him to change over to, I mean, Mr. Hyde. Yeah, anyway, the swap realities there. And so it's more about what's going on inside us than what's going on outside of us.
Mhm.
Um, I don't even remember were the triggers.
Not as familiar with the story. I mean, I've heard of it obviously, but I'm
Yeah.
not familiar with what actually goes down. But you reminded me of a term that you actually put in my head and it's stuck is measured response.
Ah,
Right. One of the things that emotional intelligence people that are emotionally intelligent and have that strong skill, they have a measured response.
mm,
And I think that it's naive or even impractical to think that all emotions are bad or that we should always be very unemotional, right? Like we have to. Um, oh, did I freeze or did you freeze?
something's going on with something because it's kind of jittery a little bit. It's both of us.
Okay. Um, can the audience let us know if we're able to hear us okay, if everything's coming through okay? But anyway, so measured response, right? I think it's flawed for us to think that we should never show emotions. I think that that's if you meditate in Tibet for your life and that's all you do, then yes, you could probably do that. But I think anger sometimes is okay. We get angry. We should express it in a proper way,
Mm,
in an appropriate way in front of appropriate people. Sadness, happiness. I forget I think there's like 5 or 6 major emotions that we have. But if you said, think about sadness or think about anger, right? Let's look at sadness for example. There's a difference between being, oh, I didn't get to eat my favorite food because everybody ate it and there was none left. I'm a little sad, right? Like disappointed,
mm-hmm.
or my father passed away and I'm extremely sad. The problem with people who don't have emotional intelligence and people under massive stress, their body can't control the level of response of sadness, right? They end up responding the same way to a small thing like not being able to
Mm,
get their favorite piece of food as they do to a death or something like that, right? I'm making
right.
this extremely exaggerated, but that's really what happens, right? We don't have a measured response for the situation. Our swing of emotion goes from 0 to 100, and that's all it knows how to do. If it's exuding emotion, it means it's all the way up here. And that's what I often see when people are stressed out and they're becoming reactive, is that kind of thing occurring. The same thing can happen with happiness. The same thing can happen, with anger, right? The same thing. Like if instead of me being upset because I stabbed my toe on a piece of corner of something, like I always end up doing, and I'm sure you all do too. I hate that.
Yeah.
Small amount of anger. Shoot, right? But huge amount of anger if somebody did an atrocious act or something like that. But people that are not emotionally intelligent, once again, they stab their toe and all of a sudden they're cussing, they're cursing, they're angry, it's volumes through the roof, all this stuff is happening. And that's what ultimately we want to correct. We don't want to say that it's not okay to ever get extremely angry. We want to say that your response to the situation and you should match what the situation is.
Yeah. Welcome, Z. Welcome, Sharon. Glad to have you all with us. Sharon says that they can hear us, so we're apparently operating okay. Um, yeah, I think you've hit on something. It's not a matter of not showing emotion versus showing emotion. It's a matter of degrees. And I think of like the example you give is a great one about stubbing your toe on something. You walk through and you stub your toe on a corner of a chair or whatever, and it hurts, and you kind of go and deal with it. But if your emotional intelligence is out of whack and there's something else going on, what happens is you stub your toe and then you hurt your foot more because you kicked the chair, and uh, you're overreactive, and that leads to other problems and just compounds the situation. So I like that thought that it's not about controlling our emotions to the point of turning them off, but rather having them appropriate to the situation. And I think, based on what I observe in our culture, that one that is especially a challenge for our culture is the anger one, because I think we have a lot of people showing anger in extremes too often. Think about road rage. Yeah, it's frustrating. Somebody cuts us off and you want to react, and that's normal. But when you react by chasing somebody down or threatening, or I saw a video the other day that where some guy got angry at a motorcycle uh, rider in front of him or something, and the guy got out and went over and knocked the guy over on the motorcycle, and I mean it was just insane. They didn't even have an accident or anything. It's uh, uh, just rage that shows up, and I think that's part of emotional intelligence that's absent, and we're lacking that control measure. And of course, I like the principles of the Bible, and one of the things that hits a lot about is anger, and that we should be slow to anger, and that our anger doesn't usually accomplish the goals that we have. And the key is finding out why we're always spring loaded, ready to pounce. I think that's where we've got to, that's the awareness that we need, is why are we staying in that state? One of my, back to driving, and especially here in Atlanta, that is its own challenge on a good day. But I have a hypothesis, if you will, that people in Atlanta drive in a half state of panic all the time. And accidents, no rain or anything, and they're going down the road white knuckled on the steering wheel. And you think, okay, well, the problem is when that's your starting state, as soon as anything changes, you get some rain, police car on the side of the road, anything, people go into a full state of panic and start overreacting to situations. And so I think that's kind of a capsule example of lack of emotional intelligence, and that there's some source there that is causing us to be in a state where we do not behave with emotional intelligence. Welcome, Rick. Glad to have you. Lee makes a comment, and I think he's probably spot on. Says anger has been mainstreamed in music and Hollywood. Yeah, in some ways, it's even been romanticized. The tough guy.
It's interesting. We focus often whenever I hear conversations around emotional intelligence occur. I hear anger as the number one emotion that people discuss because that's the most evident one. But I'm going to say something controversial, perhaps, and folks don't take me the wrong way. But any emotion is the same way. The opposites, different emotions. And I'll give you an example. Sadness. Sadness is something that we don't often talk about as lack of emotional intelligence. How can you fix something if you don't point it out as a problem that needs to be addressed, right? So that's one of the things that's happening in our society. And what I mean by that is somebody that starts to cry for the smallest reasons. In my book, right, the way I understand emotional intelligence, they may not impact people the same externally, right, internally, whatever it may be, but they're still the same issue. They're still the same problem. If something very minor happened, but all of a sudden the person's coming to tears, it's the same thing from an emotional intelligence standpoint as something minor happened and somebody's responding with anger. So that's we want to expand the idea to all the major emotions. And when somebody's not responding properly, or somebody that is, I'm trying to think what's some of the other key emotions besides happiness, anger, and sadness. Like I'm trying to remember. There's like 5 or 6 main ones. Any come to mind?
Oh goodness, I'm trying to think, because happiness includes celebration. Wow, that's a good one.
Oh, fear.
Oh yeah, as much as I've harped on that one, I should have jumped on that right in the beginning. Fear, yeah, and you're right. We've got to be careful. I think anger is easy to pick on because it's the most visible. generally speaking. Even sadness quite often gets internalized. The only outward evidence generally with sadness is some little bit of body language, facial expression, or crying, and those are can be manipulated readily. Anger is hard to cover up, depending on your level of emotional intelligence and everything. But yeah, all of them. I mean, you see people sometimes, we talk about happy. They Something happens, like somebody tells a joke, and yeah, it's a funny joke, but they laugh hysterically to a point that they can't control themselves. Is again an example of that lack of emotional intelligence. Something else going on that is internal, causing an external response that is not appropriate to the circumstances. So I agree
I'm gonna
with you.
jump on Lee's comment here real quick, Kev.
Okay.
Sadness is occasionally appropriate, anger never, because this is one of my favorite things to like debate when it comes down to emotional intelligence.
Yeah.
I think extreme of either is inappropriate.
Mm.
Um, especially when you're around other people. Now, I disagree that anger is never appropriate because, and that's why I love our show, because we can disagree and it's fine. I mean, I am angry about what's going on in my home country. I am pure, outright livid about it. And there's moments when I speak about it and I show that anger. Because I don't go and yell about it, right? I'm appropriately showing that anger. There's nothing wrong with that, in my opinion, right? I'm angry about death and the wrong deaths that occur in our country. I'm angry about certain political actions that occur in our country. Like you name it. It's okay. But when I start yelling, when I start, to project that in a massive way outward instead of saying physically, I'm upset, I raised my voice a little bit, maybe I got a little bit more stern. I don't see anything wrong with that. But the reason this comment is what I often see, we accept anger, or we accept sadness in society and even highest levels of sadness, and we don't have like a stigma against it, where we do have a stigma against anger. But I'm going to say that they're just two emotions on opposite ends of the spectrum. And it's not about right or wrong or should or never should. It's about what level of response do you have.
Yeah. And I think, again, because anger is usually more than just expressed as emotion, it's acted on. And it becomes a consuming or controlling emotion more than sadness does, generally speaking. But they're all emotions, and they're all part of it. Just like you mentioned, and is part of us. It's there, and if we didn't have fear, we'd be unhealthy. Fear is to deal with situations that we should respond to in accordance. But when we are living in a constant state of fear, then it's unhealthy. Something is wrong. Something is um, going on inside of us that's unhealthy. So, yeah, emotions are emotions. They are part of who we are. Because you know what? People without emotions, you know what they're called?
Robots?
Sociopaths.
Oh yeah, even worse.
And so the goal is not to be without emotions. The goal is to have them kept in proper perspective. That's why we call it emotional intelligence. In fact, if you think about it, that term is almost contradictory, because intelligence is more on the logic side, but it demonstrates the need for that proper balance. And we've got to honor the emotions we have, but we've got to be intelligent about how we handle it. Some people, and especially us men, we get kind of put in this situation a lot, that we are at least uh, uh, hinted at or implied that we shouldn't be emotional. And then some people, growing up, and I'm telling my age here, but growing up, if I cried, there were times my dad say, "I'll give you something to cry about," because that was considered just a bad thing. And so uh, the emotional intelligence is such an important piece, that we have both going on to give us proper responses to the situation. And I think the value of measured response is that it causes us to take a moment to not just let the emotional control, but we use that emotion and use intelligence with it to know how to respond versus just reacting.
Absolutely.
Let's see. Rick's got a comment here. It says, has our fixation with social media contributed to this phenomenon? We can now lash out at someone we're not facing eye to eye. Certainly a factor. People do things on social media that they would never, ever do face to face with somebody because there is I think, a sense of anonymity or uh, protection from responses. What are your thoughts on that one, Anton?
It's interesting. Rick brings up social media, and is social media simply an outlet of that anger, or is social media the cause of that anger? And the answer to me is both. And
Yeah.
we don't enough look at the fact that it's the cause. Let's play this out. An average person that will go and comment on social media is not your low level user. Most low level users do not engage in comments, especially on LinkedIn. They're more lurking in the background and scanning. They're not comfortable enough. They're not around enough to actually engage. People that often comment are high level users, meaning that they consume social media at a much larger rate than the lower end users. So that tells me that their brain is being negatively impacted by social media, because they're not, I'm not just talking about from a thought standpoint, right? Remember, folks, I always talk about this. Thoughts create chemicals and chemicals create thoughts, and we have to approach the solution from both ends. So they're now actually becoming chemically unstable because of constant, social media interaction and things like that. So now that stress level is going up, their limbic system is firing. Right? They have the outlet where they're comfortable to express themselves. They do it all the time, and they have the availability to do it so much with so many different things and posts and stuff. And now their brain is reactive. Every time they see a statement and they read a statement, they don't look at it as just some person talking about something. They're looking as that person. By saying what they're saying, they're attacking my personal belief and going against everything I stand for. That's what really occurs. Like, I'm simplifying things, and for everybody it's slightly different, but that's really what plays out oftentimes. We read a comment, and because that comment goes against our belief, we feel like our belief is being challenged versus somebody just has an opinion that doesn't necessarily mean anything to do with us. And then we create this reaction, and we'll react and get an argument, and before you know it, you watch these comment threads, and it goes from a little bit angry to now this person is threatening and doing all this stuff, and that's how it blows out. So just want to point out that social media is just not an outlet, it's also a source.
Yeah, and it's interesting because what is it? LinkedIn has about 750 million people on it.
Oh, I've lost track, but
Big,
yeah,
big number, but even that big number, it only represents 1% of the population. And so to to make that our world becomes a problem. People get so engaged, it becomes their world. It is going to have them out of perspective, just like people that sit and consume news 24 hours a day or 12 hours, lots of news. Well, if you sit and watch the news, the overall messaging you come away with after watching the news is the world's falling apart completely. And you're in if that doesn't put you in a defensive state in your lizard brain ready to pounce, nothing will. But we have to be emotionally intelligent enough to go, that's just a snapshot of something somewhere that's going on, and it in the big picture of things, it's really not as significant as we are allowing ourselves to be exposed to. And that's why it's so valuable to not spend over-indexed amount of time on any of these things, because they give us a skewed perspective, and it depends on our perspective as to whether our lizard brain is active or not. If we're always in feeling like you walk down the street, if you're always walking down the street assuming somebody's going to mug you at the next turn, your lizard brain is going to be full force, ready to go, because you're ready to do fight or flight or pounce or whatever. And we have caused ourselves in our culture to live in a constant state of ready to pounce. And different people, the root cause of that varies from one person to the next. Again, my favorite one is the amount of people that are so unsure of their value and worth as a person that anybody says anything that challenges them, they've attacked them personally and their values in question. And you may just make some comment about something completely innocuous, and all of a sudden it's gone personal and they're pouncing. And it's other things that will cause that, including part of, we have a lot of people that are mentally and emotionally unhealthy, and in that state you're going to be living that lizard brain a lot.
What I'm hearing you talking about, right, is that relational awareness side, right? Relational awareness, relational management. When we're involved with other people, right? That doesn't mean relationship. It doesn't mean that we have a relationship with this person. It just means that we are experiencing, some interaction with these folks. And if you're not grounded because you're stressed, and as we talked on the show all the time, if you are stressed out, you are not grounded. Bottom line, period. I don't care what you say. Your body's either in the past or in the present. I mean, in the past or the future. That's usually what's happening. And because you're not grounded, you can't stay aware and really separate the conversation, just like you're talking about, from yourself. Everything is through your lens. Everything's through, your weaknesses, your strength, whatever it may be. But if you get grounded, you're able to say, this person might be having a bad day. I wonder what happened that is causing them to react this way, and really just peeling that onion almost to get into the core of it, and not carrying that on and not taking it on yourself. So that's why you have to really manage your stress if you want to be emotionally intelligent. You have to be able to be at this level where we used to show this chart, right? This chart showed progression of our feelings, our thoughts, and things like that, and how you had a green line, you had a orange line, and you had a blue kind of area. I should call them areas, right? Your green area is where you experience kind of more, you're more empathetic, you're very calm, your joy level's high, right? Like if you're at that place, you're super grounded. And I'm telling you, most of you, not most of you, I would say all of you, when you are there, you are significantly, I'm talking about, exponentially more emotionally intelligent than if you are at the upper end of that orange area or in the blue area, because orange areas are go area, right? That's where we're supposed to go and become active. And I mean, like, performance wise. But then the problem is when we stay in that orange area too long, we don't go back down to the green like we're supposed to. We go to the blue. And that's where the extreme emotions occur. That's where you have everything is 0 to 100. There's no 5, 10, 50. Everything is that massive, emotional response, irrelevant to the situation. So you need to remember, if I'm noticing myself getting up here and I'm noticing that my emotions are high, whatever it is, you need to fix it. So I'll use myself as an example. Like if I were to open that door behind me, I just put in a sauna in there. Because it's, I talk a lot about de-stressing. I talk a lot about different mechanisms. And for me, hot and cold therapy is one of the best things I can do for my nervous system to maintain my proper level of, proper level of stress, a proper level of recovery, more importantly. And even after 3 days that I've been using it, I'm already better. I'm already feeling like I'm much more composed. I'm responding to my kid better. Like all of this has kind of been a chain of events. I snapped at my kid. I felt bad. Then I got a sauna. Then, there's a few other things that happen. And now I'm noticing I'm already getting better. So do something about it. Too often we're not regulating our stress by not adding recovery in. We only think about, I need to minimize my stress, but we don't think about increased recovery. Sometimes it's really hard to minimize stress. The other thing, I'm going to bring it back to social media. How many of you, or I should say, how many of us, in our downtime from work, from high stress activities, use social media, right? Think about that. Many, most, if not all, right? So your body's already stressed out. So now you're supposed to have downtime to go recover. Instead, you plug into your screen, you plug into your social media, and even though from a thought standpoint, you're disconnecting from the stressful things that occurred, you're not too worried about it, it's a distraction. But from a chemical standpoint, you're inducing stress on your brain and your body by consuming social media. So in the grand scheme of things, you're still increasing stress, even though in your thought, you're disengaging. So just be careful not to do that, or at least do it as minimal as possible.
Yeah, and that's another thing, is that each of us have different ways that cause us to respond or to get back into that green zone. And for example, one of the things that people like to do to de-stress is to go on walks, and there's value in it, no doubt. But for me personally, just to go on a walk, quite often doesn't de-stress. In fact, that bores me. And so there are other ways. For example, one of the things that helps me de-stress, and this would probably drive some people crazy, is I like to go sit in a park or something and just watch people. And again, that's for me. So other people, that's not going to do anything but drive them crazy. So we need to not try to take the approach that some of the companies do. Well, we'll just get a ping pong table. That'll fix everything for everybody. No, some people hate ping pong. But the key is for each of us individually to figure out what are those things that will help us get back into the green zone, if you will, and back where we are, as you say, grounded. I think what I think of is when we're green, we're responding. Okay. And then when we go up into the blue area, orange and blue areas, we're reacting. And neither is really wrong, but we have to be careful that they're appropriate. For example, measured response is great, but if a lion or a tiger is running at you about to pounce on you, measured response is not the ticket there, folks. You're going to need to be reacting. You're going to running something, doing something, because otherwise you're about to become animal food. And so it's not that there's one that's right and one that's wrong. It has to be all part of, and our favorite word here, Anton, balance, and keeping the tension between those differing characteristics that oppose each other, because we have to be able to move between one or the other given the circumstances. When we're talking about driving, yeah, we want to be measured response most of the time, but if somebody slams on their brakes pretty close to in front of you, if you're measuring your response, chances are you're going to be exchanging insurance information because you just ran into them. And so in that situation, a good reaction, quick reaction is appropriate. And so, we don't want to characterize one as better than another. It is fair to say that we need to have a good balance, and different ones of us, what that balance looks like varies. Because
go ahead. Sorry.
Go ahead. No, go ahead.
Before I answer Zaid's comment here, you can pop it up, but I want to frame this first, and then I'll get more specific.
Okay.
If you want to improve your emotional intelligence, you have to first and foremost control your stress. Like I'm telling you, there's nothing else more important, because you can read all the books in the world, you can sit in all the seminars in the world, you can think of all the mental cues in the world. If your chemical response inside your body is not where it needs to be, you're going to go to 0 to 100. That's just what's going to happen. You may be able to correct it faster because you've had practice. You may be able to change some of those things, but it's still going to happen. So if you are going to de-stress, if you're going to do that, you need to look at two things. One is your thoughts have to stop running, right? You have to give your brain a chance to recover from a thought standpoint, right? So that means that I'm not worried about the past. I'm not worried about the future. I'm simply in the present moment. And usually in the present moment, for the most time, unless you're in an actual stressful situation in that moment, you're not in a stressful environment in that time. You can disconnect and really observe even just how you're eating. Focus on your food, not the craziness that's going on around you. That's one. And we often talk about that one. But I've already mentioned like social media is a problem. The other half of it, whatever it is you choose to do, can't be something that imposes more of a chemical response stress, right? Meaning that impacts your brain chemicals, impacts your cortisol, your hormones, things like that. And oftentimes, and I'll go with your walk analogy. If you're trying to de-stress and you go for a walk, but you're going outside and it's an extremely polluted air, right? You're taking in that chemical toxicity into your system. Same thing as social media. I'm just going to put those two side by side because it's the same analogy. And now you're thinking you're de-stressing. What's that?
Different forms of pollution.
Yeah, different forms of pollution, right? You're de-stressing from a standpoint of, okay, I disconnected, but you're taking the invisible stress in. So you're not actually de-stressing. You may have disconnected the brain, but still after time, the chemicals start to stress your system out and you don't understand. You're like, I feel like my body, my environment doesn't have as much stress in it. I left that job or that boss was fired, whatever it may be, but I'm still feeling burnt out or stressed out or on edge or whatever it is. That's because the stress is that invisible stress coming chemically inside your body. Or somebody that's exposed to cleaning products all the time. You name it. There's three main stressors, right? Mental, physical, or oxidative. We all know mental. Physical, lack of sleep, too much exercise also is going to be as a physical stressor when you don't have enough recovery. And then oxidative is going to be chemical things. Like if somebody's dealing with sickness in their body and their body's constantly fighting something, that's stressful for their system. If you're exposed to chemicals, so many different things. So that's the frame, right? Zaid's comment, how would you deal with the daily pressure from work? They keep pushing all your buttons, coming back home, and there are other stressors that push buttons, 100%. As Kevin and I talk about, right, we look at the analogy of a bucket, and we look at that bucket as a capacity to hold stress. Stress is the water. If the water is overflowing, that's how you're talking about feeling right now. We have to see the big picture of stress, right? Not just the limited sources that we think as work or relationships. We have to see the complete picture. Like I said, social media, pollution, chemicals, whatever it may be. Sugar, that's a super stressful thing in your body. Yes, I said it. We're eating about 130 pounds of sugar per year per person in America. Insane. Think about that. Insane. Just ridiculous numbers. So what we're doing is we're putting that in our body. So we have to almost like make like a diagram, right? Here's this bucket. And so here's all the different things that contributing and adding water to that bucket. If I can identify all the possible sources, my ability to control the inflow improves. Because out of all of those sources, some sources are controllable. Some sources are not controllable. I have to understand, okay, these sources are uncontrollable, but here's some things I can tweak. I've done that. Now that's all I can do. But here's all the other things I'm not really looking at. I'm looking at it from a standpoint of diet, exercise, whatever, you name it. Do those things. Change your diet for the better. Do the exercise. Then it's like, okay, now I've controlled the inflow. I've adjusted everything I can. The other part is the outflow. How do I take that water out, right? How do I get a tiny little cup and I start just dumping it out, helping my body like a boat that's sinking, trying to keep it afloat and trying to get back to balance? What are the recovery methods? I just mentioned my sauna that I put into my house. That is a recovery method that is going to help me to deal with angry boss, angry, whoever partner, whoever it may be that is causing me to feel stressed. I'm going to be able to take more of it on without having a negative response, having that water overflow over a bucket, because I'm doing the outflow practices. I'm meditating every single day. I'm doing dry sauna to help my kind of chemical stress and detoxify and get rid of all that stuff. I'm not yet doing, but I'm doing cold showers for now. I'll eventually get to an ice bath, which actually helps with my dopamine, which dopamine has a lot to do with how we feel and how we, do things, and has a very direct relationship with the stress. So the point is, understand the complete picture of inflow, what's there, understand all the tools that you have for outflow, and find the things that you can do. And then as you progress, you may do more of one, less of one, whatever it may be, to realize what is my balance that's specific to me. Hopefully that, it kind of answers your question. But specifically what to do, we've listed out many different ways that we can practice, the outflow or recovery or whatever in the past. Resistance training is another one of those things I always talk about. Resistance training is one of those things that won't stress your body out. What do many people do when they're stressed? They go running. I've dealt with this so many times. A bunch of busy executives, C-level people that are massive loads of stress on their shoulders. And then they're going running marathons all the time. Well, guess what? That marathon is putting the same amount of stress on your body as your work is, because you don't realize what it's doing to you chemically. It's too much. It's killing you. You don't have the proper environment, the proper recovery to match the physical load you're constantly putting on you. So even though mentally you're like, oh, I feel great, endorphins, I just cleared my head, everything's good. But your body's going, help me, I need a break. Oh no, we got to go to work. Oh, now we got to go back to run. And it just never gets that recovery. So just be careful with what you choose and make sure it lines up to where you're at.
Well, and the other thing, and this is something we've talked about, and we even had the assessment related, is in order, we can have all the great coping mechanisms out there and have them ready to go and even practiced. But if we are foundationally unhealthy, then we're fighting a losing battle, because we're not dealing with sources of stress that are a part of our life that never go away. And so one of the things that we have to make sure is that we're foundationally healthy. And that means healthy body, healthy soul, and healthy spirit. And at any point, we do well to always be looking at those are our roots, if you will. And when we look at those roots, if there's a problem with the roots, we can do all the external things, all the coping mechanisms, but at a minimum, we're just going to stay afloat, and at worst, we're going to be drowning constantly. So if you've got something and you've tried the coping mechanisms and you're doing the things that would normally help address and reduce those stressors or manage them better, and it's still not working, you've got something else going on that you need to address. You've got to dig in and see where in your foundation is something causing a problem. And that is so key. One that we talk about, and I think is one that gets overlooked so much, is legacy. Because that's one that is always present. And depending on what's going on in life, it'll come to the forefront. But then a lot of times it's just in the background. But it will cause ongoing issues if have not addressed the foundational issue of legacy in our life. Because part of the value of legacy is it helps us to set our priority. It helps us to know that we are functioning the way we should, and our priorities are at the place they need to be. So, yeah, coping mechanisms, that's all really great, and they're necessary and important. But if you've got foundational issues, you're in trouble. And if you don't resolve those, you're going to at best tread water and barely keep your head above water. Let's see here. Z's got a comment. Says, thank you, Anton. Probably it would get even worse if one is working from home. One is always in the same environment. Um, yeah, I have to say that this working from home all the time is the so-called solution. No, it's not. uh, there's got to be a balance. Your thoughts on that one, Anton?
As somebody that works from home for the last, God, I don't know, since 20, it'll be 4 years in March 19th. March 19th will be 4 years that I've been working from home. And it's rough, yes. So it's like, this comes back to the complete picture, right? Whenever you assess anything, if you can see that full picture of the bucket and what's contributing, and we can analyze working from home the same way, right? There's positives. My schedule is much more flexible. I can get my kids. I can, be home when they're sick, whatever it is. Those stressors are reduced. But the chemical side of it, I'm way more sedentary. I don't have to get up, like do the commute, go anywhere, do anything. I go from my bed to my bathroom to my office, whatever it may be, to my living room. Very minimal activity. That is a very massive stress add, right? Chemically, I am way less exposure to sunlight, right? I'm not getting vitamin D. Vitamin D plays a big role in stress management, things like that, in hormone production, and that's hurting me. So, right. So it's not the issue that working from home is bad. We just have to adjust. We have to do things differently when we understand that big bucket and the whole picture. But yeah, you're spot on. You're always in that environment. Things are tough, especially if the home environment's tough, right? If you have relational problems at home, right? Somebody that's been divorced, myself, I'll tell you that. Like, for the first 2 years of working from home, it was a nightmare because downstairs I had a partner that was just angry at me all the time for nothing that I did. Upstairs, I had my work stress. Where was I to go to get away from it? There was nowhere I could go. It was constantly that, and all of this is just so important to understand why stress management coaching is so important, right? Like, we're blind to so much stress in our life. We're blind to so many solutions that exist in our life. Having somebody sit down with you, whether it be one-on-one, in a group, whatever it is, and help you to see that big picture, that's, in my opinion, the majority of the battle. And then we figure out a custom tailored way that fits the person that we're working with to how to correct it. And that's why these ping pong tables don't work. Elder parents, it's whatever it may be, Zaid, like it's a stress, right? You don't get to turn off. You don't get to shut down. So you got to escape home for your recovery. You got to get out of there and do things that they're going to, match your need to recover. So folks, just final thoughts. I know we just got a couple of minutes here. We're on our soapbox all the time about stress. And really, if I were to say the main reason that I do this, and I'm sure it's a little different for Kevin, but I want the world to see the complete picture of the bucket. That's what I want. I want every single one of you to see this whole thing and really understand, here are my inflows, here's my potential for how I could do outflow, and here's how I can build a plan to make it happen. That's what it's all about. That's what sustainable living, first and foremost, is for me. If we don't accomplish that as a society in the next 100 years, we're going to be changing as people. We'll survive. Don't get me wrong. We're not going anywhere. We're not going to disappear. But who we become as a society, we're not going to recognize or like, because it's just going to be awful. It's not going to be a good place. Kev, final thoughts?
That's interesting. Yeah, it's interesting. You talk about perspective, and we go about it a little different ways, but we have the same concern. And for me, the way I go about the view of it is dealing with the concept of wisdom, because the key element of wisdom is that perspective, that view of life, our world, ourselves, that is outside of ourselves, that it's more than just what is this about me and what's in it for me, what's not in it for me, but rather seeing how what I do, how I choose, how I behave, and how it impacts not just me, but others. But it's all about that better perspective of what's going on. And so, we go about it a little different, but we're on the same page, and for the same reason, is that if we don't take this and make it an important piece, where we're going to go and who we're going to become is a scary thought.
Yeah.
All right.
I wasn't laughing at what you were saying. I was laughing at these comments.
Yeah, I did. I just caught that as well. Yes. Um, but hey, if you are struggling, not having consistent emotional intelligence, and you're doing the Jekyll Hyde thing with emotional intelligence, that's a symptom. It's a symptom. It's not the cause. Figure out what is at the root of it and address it, and learn ways to function well, rather than living in that state of lizard brain all the time. Someday we need to do a graphic on lizard brain. I'm kind of picturing, and I also was thinking we really need our graphic for our stress bucket with the little spigot, and that would have been a good one. But anyway, hope that everybody's taking away something here today, if nothing else, some awareness, hopefully beyond awareness to a point where you're going, okay, I need to dig into this and see what I can do to be healthier as a person in regards to living. And by the way, be more sustainable. And for my thoughts, one of the things is if you don't do this, you'll never find your potential, because these things will hold you back from getting to the potential you have, because you're not dealing with the root causes of things in your life. So uh, we'll be back next Tuesday, same bat time, same bat channel, and hope that you'll join us. If you have a suggestion for a topic, we love to address your topics as well. And so look forward to hearing from you. Anton, any final comment?
No, thank you as always for joining. We wouldn't do this if you weren't here every day. So keep showing up, especially to our core group. This show livens up once everybody pops on and starts commenting. Yeah. So just know that you being here truly matters to what we're trying to accomplish.
Indeed. God bless. Have an amazing week, everyone. And we will see you next Tuesday. Bye now.